Okay, so this is your video for the motivation section. Motivation, quite simply, is some sort of need or desire that energizes behavior and directs it towards a goal. So, how do you get someone to do something? Either you yourself to do something, how are you motivated to do something, or how can you motivate someone else to do something? Um, there are a few different ways of doing this, and a few different perspectives, of course, on how to do this. The first one is instinct theory, which is sort of replaced by evolutionary psychology. But instinct theory basically says that we have instincts that are not learned. They are part of us when we're born, and we know how to do certain things. So you have an instinct to do certain things. So, for example, an infant, when it's born, has an instinct to breastfeed or feed in some sort of way, but it has a suckling sort of rooting that it does, and it's instinctual. No one told it to do it, it just does it. So drives and instincts. The instinct motivation works for some things, but it didn't end up being a very good overarching theory. So we moved into drives. So the example I just said was a drive for hunger. So there's some sort of physiological need. It's not just that people have these instincts. There's some sort of drive, something biological, physiological that you need, and that's what drives it. So in that case, it was hunger. The child needed to eat. Lots of different types of drives, and they increase over time. Um, so where our needs push, incentives pull us to reduce our drives. So optimal arousal. Basically, humans would like an optimal level of arousal, not elimination of arousal. So if left to their own devices, kids, monkeys, humans would like to explore the environment. If there isn't a particular need that they need to get met, like they're hungry, then they'll just start exploring, right? But you have to have those basic level of needs met first. So this is where Maslow comes in, and our psychology department is a little unique in that we are based originally solely off of Maslow's understanding of psychology. So basically, one of our department asked Maslow when he was still living, we'd like to do what you're doing. How can we do that? And he sent us one of his main students, who's Mike Ahrens, whose sculpture you can see outside of Melton Hall. And that's where our department started psychologically with Maslow. So Maslow's biggest contribution that most people know about is hierarchy of needs. So he says that we as humans have a lot of different types of needs, but there's a structure to them. And if we don't get the lower ones met, we can't actively achieve the higher ones. So, what does that look like? Your basic level of needs, as you may understand, is physiological. You need to eat and you need water, right? Basic level. If you don't get that accomplished, you're not going to be doing much of anything else. That's going to be your primary concern. After you are fed, you will start looking at your safety needs. Safety needs are actually the second tier. So you need to, form some sort of safety in the world. So that may be a home, that may be some sort of family. There needs to be that safety and security so that the threat, whether it's in our times or previous, generations, the animals aren't going to come in and get you. You've got to be safe. Then it goes to belonging and your love needs. So once you've got food and water, once you're safe, now it's time to start getting a higher level of need met, and that's you need to be loved and you want to love other people. You want to belong, you want to be accepted by others, and you don't want to be lonely. If you have that level met, a lot of us kind of live in that territory, you are able to get your self-esteem needs met. That's the next level up. And then the final level is self-actualizing. This is when you live up to your fullest potential. A lot of us don't live in that category. We are in the belonging and esteem needs. And that's where we spend most of our time. There are times when we get to self-actualizing. They're usually very short times when you feel like, aha, I'm living up to my fullest potential. But that's ideally what Maslow says we're all aiming for, but we can't get there unless we get our other needs met first. So the next few slides are a self-actualization quiz. Go ahead and take that. That's for your discussion section this week. So a lot of different theories of motivation. A lot of psychologists study this. We disagree tremendously on what this all means, but one thing that we do agree on is that there are different types of motivation. So there's the biological motivation, hunger, thirst, sex, those sorts of things, and then the social. You want to achieve, you want to be a part of something, you want to play, you want to be a part of a social order. So motivation. Two primary aspects that we're going to focus on, intrinsic and extrinsic. And this is really important for everything you do, whether you are in psychology, whether you are in the business world and want to get to understand how your employees are motivated and how you can get them to do a good job. Newsflash, it's not just pay them well. Or, any field that you want, how to get yourself or someone else to do something, intrinsic or extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation, this is where there is no external reward. There's not the grade letter to get, the A. There's not the paycheck to get, the $100 at the end of the day. This is solely an internal interest or enjoyment in the task. You love doing it just for the sake of doing it. And any joy, anything that you get from it comes internally. There's nothing external. There's not applause from the crowd. It's all internal. So if no one paid you to do it, if you weren't going to get anything from it, you would still do it. That's intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic is motivation external that comes from outside the individual. So there's all kinds of intrinsic rewards, and this is what the majority of our world is based on. So obviously money is the big thing in a job. You get a paycheck if you do your job. In school, grades are the extrinsic motivation. Sometimes there's a threat of punishment if you don't do something, right? So for kids. Competition is an extrinsic motivator because you're concerned about what your neighbor is doing or what your fellow, your coworker is doing, and you want to beat them out. So competition is another big one. So what we know about this so far is essentially that extrinsic motivation is what most work has been based off of, but it turns out it's not the most effective motivator. So, for example, for a job, assuming that you are paid at a level that you can take care of your basic needs, once that's met, people perform much better with intrinsic motivation rather than extrinsic motivation. So that means that if your employees are already getting $100,000 and their needs are being met, giving them a raise is not necessarily the best way to motivate them. A better way to motivate them would be to find out what part of your job do you love the most, and how can we get you doing more of that. So that they have some level of intrinsic motivation. So there's another theory that says there are 16 basic desires. So you can take a look at that. And then watch the Daniel Pink video. This really gives a good explanation of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. Start at the 3-minute mark, and he gives some fabulous examples. And it's got some big consequences, particularly for those of you who are in any sort of business, HR, any type you're working with other people, you have people underneath you. It's critical. So drives, these are pretty straightforward. I don't want to spend a ton of time on them. Perhaps one of the most basic human drives is hunger. So many of us eat when we're not hungry, but assuming that we're just listening to our bodies will tell us when we're hungry, right? So how do you know you're hungry? You feel there's nothing in your stomach and you feel something in your stomach. Your stomach may growl, it may be hunger, pains. So that's hunger. Take a look at how it works physiologically. Also note that losing weight is obviously very difficult, particularly in the United States, because we eat when we're not hungry. We eat for a lot of other reasons as well. But take a look at that. Sexual motivation, some folks are like, why is this a drive? The drive is to reproduce. So ultimately, every time you're engaging in sex, you may not want to have children, but you are made to have sex in order to breed, to reproduce as a species. So this is considered a drive. It's the only way that we have of ensuring our species survival. So take a little bit again, look at the physiology behind all of this. I think there's nothing too new in here that you probably haven't heard before, but just take a quick look at it and make sure it all makes sense to you. The biological components, psychological components to sexual motivation. Let's see, adolescent sexuality. There's a ton that we can go into this. Actually, I teach an entire class on sexuality and spirituality. Dr. Hemliniak takes a class on sexuality, so I don't want to go too far into this, but certainly there's a lot of really fascinating stuff about what motivates us to behave sexually and what does not, and how we get particularly young people to not engage sexually or to engage sexually in safe ways. So, yeah. Factors that reduce sexual activity in teens, we know, for better or for worse. Teens with higher intelligence, this is in the, if you think back to our intelligence stuff, this is in the IQ sense. Delay sex. Kids who are more religiously involved, not surprisingly, delay sex. Although those kids wait longer till they have sex, but when they do have sex, it's often unprotected. There's a whole theory about why that's the case. If a father is available in the home, that is a factor often contributing to waiting to have sex. And kids who are teens who are involved in some sort of program to reduce teen pregnancy, many of those programs are effective in decreasing the onset of sexual activity. Sexual orientation. I want to be very clear about this. This is not just who you have sex with. A lot of times being gay, lesbian, it gets attributed to you just have sex with someone of the same sex. It's a whole lot broader than that, and it's not defined basic to the sex act. For example, I right now am not having sex, and I am a straight woman. So in the same way that my being straight or heterosexual isn't defined by me being involved in a sex act, so it is the same way with folks that are not identified as heterosexual. I think a lot of young folks, that's pretty clear now, but particularly with other generations and other cultures, that's a really big conflict of how do we define sexual orientation. So look at the way the PowerPoint and book define it. A personal preference for emotional and sexual relationship with individuals of the same sex. Not just to have sex, but that sort of emotional connection as well. I think we're not going to go too much more into this. Origins of sexual orientation, we've been looking at this for a long time. A lot of folks say if you were born gay, it justifies being gay. If you were not, if it was something that happened to you, then we should be able to fix it. None of the programs that changed, the ex-gay programs, are effective. In fact, the APA strongly recommends against them. There are some laws preventing their use, particularly with minors, so we do not support that whatsoever, but it is part of the debate for some folks. Bottom line, we don't know how someone becomes gay. We think it's much more biological, but we don't know how exactly it happens. Homosexuality does happen in animals as well. Many species actually it happens. So anyway, research continues on that. Achievement motivation, how do we desire a particular result? Some of you are high achievers, and some of you, it doesn't really matter what you achieve or not. There's how does someone become more motivated to be an achiever? Parents and teachers have a big influence. There are emotional roots to that you've learned that you get certain positive emotions when you achieve, and there are also cognitive roots. You want to be competent, so you have high expectations of yourself and you set those achievement boundaries high. I'm going to let you just take a look through most of the rest of the PowerPoint. Flow is a really interesting thing that's being studied right now with positive psychology, so people who get in the flow. So a lot of times with arts, with athletes, you hear about people who just get in the flow. They're in it. They're not having to think a lot about it. They're not anxious and overwhelmed. They're not bored. They're just in the motion doing it. And that's a state where you ideally want to be. You're driven less by extrinsic rewards and you're more just in the moment. You are much more likely to be satisfied with your work if you are able to get in there. A lot of psychology studies is so many times psychology gets seen as just the people who do therapy. That's not the case. There's personnel psychology, organizational psychology, all kinds of psychology that deals with all of this stuff, more specifically in the business world. So take a little bit of a look at that. We don't have a strong focus on it in our department, but there is a lot of psychology, a lot of industrial organizational psychology, human resources that comes from this perspective. So take a look at that. I think that's about it for this video. As always, let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you take some time with this topic. As with many of them, this is something that expands a lot broader than what you think of as traditional therapy and traditional psychology. So hopefully it'll be of use for you somewhere along the way. Have a great week. Thanks.